The Young and the Restless spoilers reveal that there could be another curveball coming in the Aristotle Dumas storyline. There's been an enormous mystery surrounding this reclusive billionaire, who doesn't even have his picture posted online. Of course, the moniker Aristotle Dumas appears to be a chosen name, rather than one he was born with. The Dumas part was undoubtedly selected as a nod to Alexander Dumas, who wrote The Count of Monte Cristo. Perhaps Aristotle, or whatever his actual first name is, bonded with Damian Kane over their mutual love for their book. That may have been why Aristotle decided to bring Damian into his corporation and let him manage some companies. Victor has a history with Aristotle since they would compete for enterprises in the past, but Aristotle would always disappear in the end. However, we should observe that Victor previously admitted he'd never actually met Aristotle. Aristotle's disappearing act was more of a situation where he just wasn't competing anymore. This mystery figure would strike and eventually vanish in a sense of removing himself from the drama. The interesting aspect that they keep playing up the fact that nobody knows what Aristotle looks like. That presents a couple of distinct options, both of which could involve Billy Flynn's upcoming debut. Y&R's evidently leading fans to believe Aristotle is someone older, or at least old enough to go legitimately compete with Victor. What if the wrinkle is that Aristotle is decades younger, and that's partly why he's kept a low profile? If Billy Flynn is portraying Aristotle Dumas, then maybe he created this mysterious image to make sure he was taken seriously despite being more youthful than many of his competitors. Flynn is 39 now, but Aristotle has been operating long enough to earn billions and construct a massive empire. On the other hand, there's another option to contemplate here. What if Aristotle secretly retired or passed away, leaving his son to win the keys to the kingdom and continue using his name? Perhaps Billy Flynn's debut will reveal that Aristotle is his father, and that he's taken over for his dad at this point. That would explain why there's still so much secrecy regarding Aristotle and Y&R's build-up to this major reveal. Whatever the case, Aristotle's name will turn up as a caller on Billy Abbott's phone in the March 24th episode. Billy and Aristotle's alliance could lead to problems for Victor, so stay tuned for updates on the negative news that's brewing. The Young and the Restless spoilers say Victor will make some predictions about drawing Aristotle out of hiding, but he could be in for a shock once that occurs. Anyone who spends time on social media has undoubtedly seen the Home Goods Challenge trend. For those who aren't familiar, it's when shoppers record themselves with their amazing home goods findings. And by amazing, we mean off-the-walls bonkers finds. It's been around for a little while, so when we saw the Young and the Restless Michelle Stafford participate in, with her son, no less, we dove headfirst into her video to see what she dug up. And we were not disappointed. Take, for instance, their find of a side table that could only be used outside, 'cause it would be completely unfunctional inside that's shaped like pizza. Brilliant. Then there's a picture to hang in my bathroom of 3 women, with an insect of some sort over their private parts. So demure. So imaginative. Moving back outdoors, the actress confessed that she was just dying for a gnome to go outside, but not just any gnome. He's riding a turtle. What do you know? There it was. Then, for those intimate evenings in the bedroom, Stafford admitted she could really use some big bright disco lips right next to my bed. And honestly, who couldn't? Of course, one mustn't neglect house guests. For the guest room, the actress was thinking of a moose or buffalo. Wouldn't be able to really tell what it is, just sitting in a bathtub. Personally, we're leaning more towards buffalo, but we're also not entirely positive the animal she discovered was either of them. And since it's so important to continue a theme throughout the home, Stafford is obviously looking to keep the animal motif going. So perhaps an end table, preferably for my living room. That's a leopard, a gold leopard, with the glass on his head. Done and done. Check out the complete hilarious video below. Wow, they really do have everything, Laura Lee Bell wrote. Too cute. Such a handsome assistant. Of course, not everyone was pleased with the video. Wow, doing it without me, Stafford's daughter Natalia commented. Whoops. Busted. I knew you were gonna be mad, Mom replied. Hey, there's always next time. We're sure Home Goods has plenty more random, crazy finds for the Staffords to uncover. The young and the restless spoilers reveal that Diane Jenkins Abbott is fiercely protective of her loved ones. Kyle Abbott is her only son, and she worked diligently to prove to him she'd changed. With Summer Newman about to step up her reunion efforts, could Diane wind up getting involved? Which woman would Diane prefer Kyle to be with? Keep reading, and let's talk about what could happen next with this storyline. Diane Jenkins Abbott's reformation. Fans have watched as Diane came back from the dead and attempted to earn her way back into her loved ones' lives. Diane's first objective was her son Kyle. It took a while, but eventually, Diane earned the affection and trust of both Kyle and Jack Abbott. Diane is a caring mother and fiercely protective of Kyle. However, she can also overstep, and sometimes forgets that Kyle is a mature man. Claire Grace Newman's romance. More recently, Kyle and Summer divorced. Eventually, the Abbott heir started dating Claire Grace Newman. The two really seem to have connected and bonded. Claire is a touch naive since it's her first real relationship, but she's learning and maturing. The reformed villain is also learning how to develop a backbone, something she's forgotten since her Jordan chapter. Summer Newman's reunion mission. Recently, Summer interrupted another one of Claire and Kyle's outings. The young woman claimed it was an emergency and needed to speak about Harrison Abbott. Of course, there was no actual emergency, and she invented a ridiculous story about 7-year-olds gossiping about police business. At that time, Claire stepped aside, but her tone and body language made it clear Summer was going too far. The girlfriend even questioned if it was genuinely an emergency, but Summer insisted it was. It seems that Summer is going to scale up her mission to reunite with Kyle. Now the Abbott man has set down boundaries with his ex-wife. However, Summer is really ambitious and can be a schemer much like her mother Phyllis Summers. Fierce warning. The young and the restless spoilers reveal that Diane could observe Summer trying to worm her way back into Kyle's life. While Diane never really had any significant issues with Summer as Kyle's partner, she does know her son is happy right now. So Diane might step in and tell Summer to back off. Summer will certainly not back off though. Summer doesn't throw herself at males, but she does have a way of drawing them closer. So, how far will Summer go to get her man? And will Diane go too far attempting to protect her son? In her hotel suite, Tracy gazed at the message on Alan's phone about a security breach. Alan emerged from the bathroom and halted in his tracks when he found Tracy holding his phone. He demanded to know what she was doing. Tracy apologetically claimed that she hadn't been snooping, but Alan's phone had been making a strange sound, and she thought something was wrong. She referred to the alert about a security vulnerability and precautions being enacted. Alan grabbed the phone away from Tracy and read the message. She prayed she hadn't upset him. He claimed that he didn't know what the messages were about, but he'd begun receiving alerts a couple of days earlier, so he'd stopped opening his phone because he feared it had been hacked. He begged her for absolution for overreacting when he'd seen her with his phone. Tracy readily forgave Alan and apologized for not contemplating that what was on his phone might be private. She suggested he get a new phone if he was concerned a hacker might access his data. Alan admitted that it had been silly of him not to open the phone, but he'd wanted to be extra cautious. Tracy remembered that he'd sent her a text message from his phone after he'd bought the engagement ring. Alan chalked it up to being so eager to get back to his beautiful fiancée that he'd forgotten about the risk. Alan figured it was too late to do anything if he'd already been hacked, but he thought it might be fascinating as a therapist to find out what it felt like to have his identity stolen. Alan imagined it had to be psychologically devastating to be victimized by being shorn of who he was by a criminal using his identity for nefarious purposes. Tracy pointed out that it had happened to him when Martin had purported to be Alan. Alan turned the topic back to the nuptials. Tracy contemplated whether to have the event at the Abbott home or in Paris. She acknowledged that not all of Alan's memories from Paris were fantastic. Alan swore that Tracy had given him such joy that the bad portions had been forgotten, and they kissed. He declared that he didn't care where the wedding happened as long as he was marrying her. Alan's phone began to ping with more security messages, and Tracy contemplated what kind of hack it could be. Alan testily asked why Tracy kept asking inquiries about his phone. He then turned it off, so it wouldn't disturb her anymore. Tracy defended that she'd believed it would bother him, and he apologized for snapping. Alan insisted that all that mattered was that they were in love, engaged, and about to spend the remainder of their lives together. He proposed that they jump on a plane to Paris and scope out venues. Daniel and Summer were overjoyed to reconcile with Phyllis at the athletic club. Over a burger and wine, Phyllis reveled in having a choice of food that wasn't poisoned. Summer encouraged her mom not to pretend that all was all right, and Daniel prompted Phyllis to tell them everything. Phyllis recalled waking up in the abandoned psychiatric clinic with Sharon and being unable to find a way out. Daniel pointed out that there had been no ransom request and questioned whether the kidnapping had been a twisted game. Phyllis informed her kids that it had been a strange experiment where the captor had forced her and Sharon to work together to get free. Summer fretted that the culprit hadn't yet been captured, so Phyllis was still in danger. Phyllis assured her children that she had police protection. Daniel worried that the person behind the kidnapping had evaded authorities, and Phyllis resolved to hunt the person down herself. Daniel warned her against going vigilante, and Phyllis begrudgingly vowed to let the police handle it. Phyllis disclosed that the captor had known about her decades of hostility with Sharon, and had given them riddles and tests based on their history. Phyllis explained how she and Sharon had saved one another's lives. Daniel inquired whether Phyllis and Sharon had been able to work through their mutual resentment by working together. Phyllis conceded that she and Sharon had a new appreciation for one another's strengths. Summer inquired if there was a chance Ian Ward had survived and been the one behind it. Phyllis relayed that Chance had assured her Ian's body had been cremated. She was obviously shaken that the kidnapper hadn't yet been found. At Billy's home, Sally was in disbelief over Billy's account of his role in tracking down Sharon and Phyllis. He contended that he would have done anything to save Phyllis. Billy considered himself a jerk for presuming Phyllis had gone rogue on him and taking her name out of the press release instead of trusting her. Sally urged him not to blame himself, but Billy regretted not realizing something was amiss sooner. He expressed relief that he'd gotten there before Phyllis and Sharon had succumbed to the intentional gas release in the room. Billy bemoaned that it wouldn't be over until the kidnapper was captured. Sally rubbed Billy's shoulders and lauded him for how much he'd risked to assist his friends. Billy wanted to nail the person, but was also glad to hand in his cape and let Chance handle it while Billy took Abbott Communications into the stratosphere. Sally cooed that not donning a cape didn't make him any less of a hero, and they kissed. When the doorbell rang, Billy and Sally attempted to disregard it, but Phyllis called out to ask if Billy was there. Billy let Phyllis in and observed that she looked better than the last time he'd seen her. He conveyed surprise to see her out and about before she requested to have a conversation with him. After Sally departed for the office, Billy asked what Phyllis wanted to talk about. Phyllis stifled a sob and admitted that she wasn't perfect. She continued that she needed her life back, and he was the only one who could assist her. Phyllis vowed she was ready to jump into Abbott Communications and have the biggest, baddest launch ever. She apologized for delaying the timeline, but Billy urged her to take some time after they'd almost lost her. Phyllis became emotional as she described getting through her ordeal by thinking about seeing her kids again and going back to Abbott Communications. Phyllis envisioned constructing something strong and changing things for the better with her son by her side. She emphasized that she needed it right away, because it was the only way she'd get past what had been taken from her. Billy advised Phyllis not to take on more than she could manage right then, but she maintained that she needed the excitement and energy of launching their company to get her past it. She suggested they commence with the press release. Billy confessed that he'd sent out the release without her name attached to it when he'd believed she'd disappeared on him. Phyllis stuttered not to worry about it. Billy acknowledged he'd made a mistake because he knew Phyllis would never bail on him or the company. Phyllis questioned whether he really wanted her on board or if it was a mercy thing. Billy proclaimed that he needed her fire, and she was the only person on the planet he wanted to launch the company with. He asked if she could forgive him. "Of course I forgive you. You spared my life," Phyllis cried as she hurled her arms around him. Chance instructed a group of police officers to investigate the room where Sharon and Phyllis had been held and look for leads about who had kidnapped the women. Chance doubted they'd discover fingerprints other than those of the victims, but he hoped to find evidence that would help them find out who had done it and explain their connection to Phyllis and Sharon. Later, Chance found a device attached to the gas line. At Crimson Lights, Nick presented Sharon with a latte and a brownie. He pondered if she'd rather be home getting some rest, but she asserted that she was exactly where she wanted to be, where everyone was happy and free. And now I am too. All because of you, she gushed as she squeezed his hand and gazed into his eyes. Sharon recognized how much she'd taken merely living life and making basic choices for granted until the control had been taken out of her hands. Nick asked if she remembered anything that might give them a clue about who had been behind the kidnapping. Sharon recounted that she and Phyllis had pondered if it was someone they knew, like one of their own kids who'd been trying to teach them a lesson. Nick countered that none of their offspring were capable of doing anything like that. Sharon agreed, with Nick labeling it extreme therapy. Sharon compared it to an attempted exorcism, and Nick inquired whether it had been successful. Sharon found what she and Phyllis had gone through to be paradoxically cathartic, since they'd had to work together to solve riddles to win the game and go home. Sharon contemplated how much the perpetrator knew about not just her history with Phyllis, but also their personalities and what made them tick. She suspected the person had experience in psychology, because they'd known how to pit her and Phyllis against one another, and compel them to confront their animosity and distrust by making life-or-death choices. Sharon compared it to aversion or desensitization therapy, as if it had been some type of twisted therapeutic intervention. Chance entered the coffee house and informed Nick and Sharon that he'd grabbed a number of items at the scene. Chance divulged that he'd been able to trace the purchase of a remote control attached to the gas line, and he'd validated with the landlord that it hadn't been there before. Chance reported that the device had been purchased at a hardware store not far from the clinic. He intended to analyze the store's surveillance footage and see if there was anyone on it who Sharon or Phyllis recognized. Sharon thanked Chance for being thorough and expressed faith that he'd capture the monster behind the kidnapping. Chance pointed out that no one would blame her if she went out of town to clear her head. Nick suggested she go to Europe with Faith to visit Noah. Sharon consented to go on one condition, that Nick join them.